Ma'am, would you like to come first? Those 5 simple words spoken by a 21-year-old elevator operator on a busy Friday afternoon would bring an entire corporate tower to its knees within 72 hours. But Sophie Lane had no idea that her quiet act of kindness was being watched. She didn't know that hidden cameras were recording every gentle gesture, every compassionate glance. And she certainly didn't know that the most powerful man in the building had been studying her for months, waiting for this exact moment. What Sophie did know was that the elderly woman standing at the back of the elevator line was struggling to breathe. While everyone else saw an inconvenience, Sophie saw something else entirely. A grandmother trying to hide her pain from her young granddaughter, clutching her chest in small, desperate movements. For most of her life, Sophie had been the shy girl who disappeared into backgrounds, who apologized for taking up space, who whispered when she should have spoken. But something about seeing Mrs. Hartwell's quiet suffering awakened a strength she didn't know she possessed. Growing up in rural Minnesota, Sophie had learned early that being noticed often meant being criticized. Her mother, a single parent working 3 jobs, had taught her that good girls stayed quiet, worked hard, and didn't make waves. When Sophie moved to Minneapolis for this job, she'd brought that mindset with her: keep your head down, do your work, don't cause problems. But watching Mrs. Hartwell struggle while everyone else rushed past felt like watching her own grandmother's final days all over again. Sophie remembered holding Grandma Rose's hand in the hospital, wishing anyone had noticed her distress sooner. So she pressed a button. Not the one everyone expected. Not the one that would take the impatient executives to their high-floor meetings. Instead, she pressed 3 the floor with the medical office. The shy girl who had spent 21 years making herself invisible had just made the most visible choice of her life. And in that single moment, everything changed. Sophie Lane possessed a gift that even she didn't fully understand. In the cramped confines of Mercer Tower's elevator, she could read people like open books written in worry lines and hidden tears. The man in the gray suit checking his phone wasn't just busy, he was terrified. She could see it in the way his shoulders curved inward, protecting himself from news of a lost contract. The young pregnant woman trying to blend in with her colleagues wasn't just quiet. She was holding the weight of a secret, her hand instinctively covering her stomach when she thought no one was looking. But today was different. Today, Sophie's unusual sensitivity picked up something that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, 73 years old, visiting her granddaughter Emma at work, wasn't just tired from the long wait. Her breathing was shallow, erratic. Her left hand kept pressing against her chest, in a rhythm Sophie recognized from her grandmother's final days. Sophie had first noticed her sensitivity to people's emotions when she was 8 years old. She could tell when her mother was stressed by the way her shoulders tensed, could sense when her teacher was having a difficult day by subtle changes in voice tone and posture. It had made her even more of a shy girl, overwhelmed by constantly noticing details others missed. Most of the time she tried to focus on other things, afraid that her observations might seem intrusive. But working in the elevator had sharpened her observational skills. In those small enclosed spaces, people's true states became more apparent. She'd learned to recognize the signs of stress, sadness, and pain through years of careful attention to body language, breathing patterns, and subtle vocal cues. Today, Mrs. Hartwell was showing classic signs of cardiac distress that Sophie had seen when her own grandmother suffered heart problems, shallow breathing, pale complexion, and the telltale gesture of pressing a hand to the chest. The executive team, Ashley Moore from administration and Derek Lewis from senior management, pushed forward as always, treating Sophie like part of the elevator machinery. Ashley barely looked at her as she snapped, "12th floor, and make it quick." Ashley had been with the company for 8 years, climbing her way up, through sheer determination and an iron will to never show weakness. She'd learned early that corporate America rewarded efficiency over empathy, results over relationships. The idea that some shy girl operating an elevator would dare disrupt her schedule felt like a personal affront to everything she'd worked to build. Derek, meanwhile, saw Sophie's intervention as something worse, a threat to the natural order he'd carefully cultivated. At 29, he'd positioned himself as indispensable to the senior management team by being faster, sharper, and more ruthless than his peers. He'd never learned the elevator operator's name because he'd never seen her as worth knowing. But Sophie's eyes never left Mrs. Hartwell. "Ma'am, would you like to come first?" Sophie asked, her voice gentle but firm. Ashley's head snapped up. "Excuse me. We have a meeting." Sophie was already guiding Mrs. Hartwell into the elevator, her hand steady on the older woman's elbow. Instead of pressing 12, her finger found 3. The elevator lurched upward, and Sophie felt the familiar weight of disapproving stares. Ashley's face flushed red with indignation, while Derek muttered something under his breath about knowing your place. But Mrs. Hartwell's breathing was evening out, and little Emma was holding her grandmother's hand, unaware that those extra few minutes might have saved a life. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, Sophie helped Mrs. Hartwell out personally. "The medical office is just down the hall to your right," she said softly. "Dr. Martinez is wonderful. She'll take good care of you." Mrs. Hartwell squeezed Sophie's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you, dear. You have the kindest eyes." As the elevator continued to the 12th floor in tense silence, Sophie felt the weight of Ashley's glare and Derek's calculating stare. She'd crossed a line, and they all knew it. In their world, compassion was inefficiency, and inefficiency was unforgivable. Later that afternoon, Sophie would learn that Mrs. Hartwell had indeed been taken to the medical office, then rushed to the hospital when Dr. Martinez detected irregular heart rhythms. The quick response had prevented what could have been a massive cardiac event. But at that moment, standing in the elevator as Ashley stormed out without a word, and Derek brushed past her with deliberate rudeness, Sophie felt only the familiar shame of a shy girl who had dared to speak up in a world that preferred her silence. Stay with me. This story is just beginning to unfold. 22 floors above, Jonathan Miles sat in his corner office, watching monitors that most people assumed were for security. But Jonathan wasn't watching for thieves or trespassers. He was watching for something far more rare, genuine human kindness, in a world that seemed to have forgotten what it looked like. For 2 years, ever since losing his daughter Sarah in an elevator accident, Jonathan had become deeply interested in workplace culture and employee well-being. He'd implemented comprehensive monitoring systems not just for security, but to understand how company culture affected day-to-day interactions between staff members. The accident had happened on a Tuesday morning. Sarah, 19 and studying social work, had been visiting him at his previous company. The elevator cable snapped between the 14th and 15th floors. She'd been alone except for an elderly janitor who'd tried to comfort her in those final moments. That janitor, Miguel Santos, had later told Jonathan about Sarah's final words, "Tell my dad I was trying to help someone today." She'd been carrying donation forms for a homeless shelter, hoping to get corporate sponsorship. Even facing death, his daughter had been thinking about others. Ever since then, Jonathan had made employee welfare a central focus of his business philosophy. He'd seen too many companies prioritize efficiency over humanity, and he was determined that his organization would be different. The monitoring systems helped him identify patterns, which departments had the highest stress levels, which managers were struggling, which employees went above and beyond in supporting their colleagues. He'd also started a quiet tradition that no one knew about. Every month he personally reviewed footage, to identify employees who showed exceptional kindness or went out of their way to help others. These people received anonymous bonuses, unexpected promotions, or improved assignments. It was his way of honoring Sarah's memory by rewarding the very qualities she'd embodied. Over the past year, Sophie Lane had consistently appeared in positive reports from other staff members. The shy girl from rural Minnesota had earned respect through small, consistent acts of consideration that seemed to ripple through the entire building's atmosphere. Jonathan had watched her comfort a crying intern after a harsh meeting, help an elderly client find the restroom, and even share her lunch with a new employee who'd forgotten theirs. But there was something else about Sophie that reminded Jonathan of Sarah, the same intuitive understanding of people's needs, the same gentle way of offering help without making someone feel diminished by accepting it. For 6 months, he'd watched her work. She was different. When the janitor's arthritis flared up, Sophie somehow knew to hold the door a few extra seconds. When the new intern looked lost and overwhelmed, Sophie would quietly point her toward the right floor. When the mailroom clerk's wife was in the hospital, Sophie made sure he always had the elevator to himself on his worst days. Jonathan had begun to think of Sophie as his kindness barometer, a way to measure whether his company was succeeding in maintaining its humanity amid the pressures of corporate growth. If someone like Sophie could thrive here, if her natural compassion was supported rather than suppressed, then maybe he was building the kind of workplace Sarah would have been proud of. But today's footage made Jonathan lean forward in his chair, his coffee growing cold, as he replayed the scene again and again. Sophie hadn't just been kind to Mrs. Hartwell, she'd potentially saved her life. The medical report would confirm it later. Mrs. Hartwell had indeed been experiencing cardiac distress. Those extra minutes, that immediate access to the third-floor medical facility, had been crucial. Jonathan reached for his phone. "Sarah." He called his assistant. "I need everything you can find on Sophie Lane. Background performance reviews, everything." "Sir, that young woman just demonstrated something I've been looking for since I started this company. I want to know who she is." What Jonathan didn't know was that Derek Lewis had been listening outside his door, having arrived early for a meeting. Derek's face had gone pale as he realized the CEO was taking special interest in an elevator operator. In Derek's zero-sum worldview, if Sophie was rising, someone else had to be falling, and he wasn't about to let that someone be him. As Derek walked away from Jonathan's office, his mind was already working on ways to discredit Sophie before she could become a threat to his carefully constructed position in the company hierarchy. Saturday morning arrived with an email that made Sophie's hands tremble as she read it. Subject: disciplinary action. Violation of elevator protocol. Miss Lane. Your actions yesterday in disrupting established elevator priorities constitute a violation of company policy. You are hereby placed on probationary status pending review. Unauthorized changes to elevator operations will not be tolerated. Management. Sophie read it 3 times, each word hitting her like a physical blow. She'd saved someone's life, she was sure of it now, and this was her reward. Walter Dean found her in the lobby an hour later, sitting on a bench with the printed email in her lap. At 72, Walter had seen enough office politics to recognize injustice when it walked through his door. "Let me guess," he said, settling beside her with a grunt. "Someone didn't like that you put humanity before hierarchy yesterday." Sophie looked up, surprised. "How did you—" "Child, I've been watching people in this building for 40 years. 30 as a security guard, 10 in retirement, and now back part-time because I miss the stories." Walter's eyes twinkled with something between mischief and wisdom. "You know what I find funny. The people who talk the most about professional behavior are usually the ones who've forgotten how to be decent human beings. Walter had seen Sophie's transformation over the months, from the terrified, shy girl who'd started the job, barely able to make eye contact, to someone who quietly commanded respect through simple acts of kindness. He'd watched her learn to read people, to anticipate their needs, to offer comfort, without overstepping boundaries. I remember my first week working here. Walter continued his voice, taking on the storytelling tone that made him beloved among the support staff. 40 years ago, this building was different. People knew each other's names. Executives would ask about your family. The Christmas party was actually fun because people genuinely cared about each other. He gestured toward the gleaming lobby around them. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that buildings are just boxes without the people who fill them. We started treating efficiency like a religion and kindness like a weakness. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. But here's something you don't know. Someone upstairs has been watching you, and I don't think it's for the reasons you might fear. Sophie frowned. What do you mean? 25th floor. Corner office. Mr. Miles has cameras everywhere, but not for the reasons most people think. He's looking for something specific, something he lost a long time ago. Walter stood up slowly. Trust me on this one, Sophie. Sometimes the storm comes right before the sunshine. By Monday morning, something extraordinary was happening at Mercer Tower, and it started in the places no one usually noticed. Maria, the cleaning lady on the 5th floor, mysteriously couldn't find her keys to Ashley's office. The maintenance crew discovered an urgent issue with Derek's air conditioning that would take several days to repair. The cafeteria staff ran out of Ashley's favorite latte just as she arrived for her morning coffee. But the service elevators ran smoothly. The freight deliveries arrived on time. And somehow every other employee seemed to be having an unusually pleasant day. Walter watched it all unfold with the satisfaction of someone who understood that buildings weren't run by executives. They were run by the people executives never bothered to notice. You see, he explained to Sophie, as they watched Ashley struggle with her keycard at the main elevator. You might think you're just an elevator operator, but you're the first person most people see when they arrive and the last person they see when they leave. You set the tone for their entire day. Sophie was beginning to understand that her small acts of kindness had created ripples she'd never imagined. The security guards nodded when they saw her. The mailroom clerks smiled. Even the executive's assistants, the ones who knew where the real power lay, treated her with a respect that seemed to puzzle their bosses. Meanwhile, 25 floors up, Jonathan Miles was making phone calls that would change everything. I want a complete audit of our workplace culture, he told his head of human resources. And I wanted to start with understanding why our elevator operator has a better grasp of employee well-being than our entire management team. Tuesday morning brought an announcement that sent shockwaves through Mercer Tower. Effective immediately, elevator access to floors. 2-220 is restricted pending a comprehensive workplace environment review. Priority access cards will be issued based on operational necessity and employee well-being protocols. Ashley Moore stood in the lobby, her keycard rejected by every elevator she tried. Around her, other executives and senior staff found themselves equally locked out. But the cleaning crew, maintenance staff, and support personnel moved freely between floors, their access cards working perfectly. This is ridiculous, Ashley snapped at Walter, who was manning the information desk with barely concealed amusement. I have meetings. I have deadlines. Stairs are right over there, ma'am, Walter replied cheerfully. 14 flights. Good exercise. Derek Lewis, watching from across the lobby, felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. If the CEO was really behind this, and who else could it be, then his campaign to discredit Sophie had backfired spectacularly. But the most shocking sight was yet to come. Through the glass doors of the 25th floor conference room, Ashley could see Sophie Lane sitting at a mahogany table surrounded by corporate executives, HR specialists, and people Ashley had never seen before. Sophie, the girl she'd dismissed as just an elevator operator, was at the center of whatever was happening. And Sophie's real story is just beginning. In the hushed atmosphere of the 25th floor conference room, Sophie Lane sat across from Jonathan Miles, feeling like she was living someone else's life. Sophie. Jonathan began his voice carrying a weight she couldn't identify. Do you know why I hired extra security cameras 6 months ago? She shook her head, still not understanding why she was here instead of disciplinary review. 10 years ago, I lost my daughter Sarah in an elevator accident. She was only 19. Jonathan's hands were steady, but Sophie could see the old pain in his eyes. After that, I became obsessed, I suppose, with watching how people behave in elevators, looking for signs that humanity still existed in corporate America. He turned a monitor toward her showing elevator footage from the past 6 months. Sophie watched herself, helping the arthritic janitor, comforting the overwhelmed intern, giving the grieving mailroom clerk space and dignity. You see, Sophie, I wasn't watching you to catch you doing something wrong. I was watching you do everything right. And Friday afternoon, when you recognized Mrs. Hartwell's medical distress and acted on it, Jonathan's voice caught slightly. You saved her life. The paramedics confirmed she was having a cardiac episode. Your quick thinking got her to medical help in time. Sophie's eyes widened. Is she? She's fine. Completely fine. And she specifically asked me to thank the angel in the elevator, who knew exactly what she needed when she couldn't ask for it herself. Jonathan pulled out a new employee badge, this one with a silver edge Sophie had never seen before. You're not an elevator operator anymore, Sophie. You're our new director of human experience. Your job will be to teach others what you do naturally, how to see people as human beings rather than obstacles or opportunities. The room fell silent as Sophie stared at the badge, her title reading, Director of Human Experience, Mercer Tower. But I don't understand, she whispered. Ashley said I violated protocol. Ashley, Jonathan said firmly, will be attending your first training session on emotional intelligence in the workplace, along with everyone else who forgot that our employees are people first and profit centers second. 3 weeks later, Sophie stood before the entire Mercer Tower staff in the main auditorium. The shy elevator girl was gone, replaced by someone who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it. When I started working here, Sophie began, her voice clear and confident, I thought my job was to press buttons and announce floors, but I learned something that changed everything. My real job was to pause, to really see the people stepping into that small space with me. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes finding Ashley and Derek in the front rows. I saw the executive who was terrified of losing his biggest client, but couldn't show weakness. I saw the young mother hiding her pregnancy because she feared losing advancement opportunities. I saw the grandmother trying to protect her granddaughter from her own fear. Ashley shifted in her seat, recognizing herself in that description. The truth is, Sophie continued, we all have elevators in our lives, small moments where we choose between rushing past someone or taking time to really see them, between treating people as inconveniences or recognizing them as fellow human beings with their own struggles and dreams. Walter, standing at the back of the room with a handful of other longtime employees, felt his eyes fill with tears as he watched the quiet girl he'd mentored step into her power. From now on, Sophie announced, every elevator in this building will have a new protocol. It's not about who has the highest position or the most urgent meeting. It's about who needs compassion most in that moment. The applause started slowly, with Walter clapping first, then the security guards, then the cleaning staff. Soon the entire auditorium was on its feet, and Sophie saw something beautiful. Ashley wiping tears from her eyes, Derek nodding with what looked like genuine respect, and throughout the crowd people looking at each other, really looking for perhaps the first time in years. Mortnum sau Mercer Tower, Jan Trien Kai Thi, GM Chuong Trin, EQ First, Emotional Intelligence. First train ba tang voi ke hoch mo rong dan dan. The pilot program had shown measurable results, 25% reduction in employee complaints, improved collaboration scores, and higher job satisfaction ratings among participants. Most importantly, the changes felt authentic rather than forced. People were genuinely more considerate because they'd learned to see each other differently. Sophie's role had evolved naturally from workplace culture specialist to training coordinator. She now split her time between developing programs, facilitating workshops, and working one-on-one with managers who wanted to improve their emotional intelligence skills. Her small office on the 15th floor looked out over downtown Minneapolis. Her desk held feedback forms from workshop participants, photos from team-building exercises she'd designed, and one special picture, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell and her granddaughter Emma, at the company's first Employee Appreciation Day. The changes had been gradual but profound. Ashley had enrolled in evening business psychology classes and was working to become a more empathetic leader. Derek had surprised everyone by becoming one of the program's strongest advocates, using his influence to encourage other departments to participate. But the most meaningful change was in the daily interactions throughout the building. People held doors longer, smiled more genuinely, and asked, "How are you?" with actual interest in the answer. Ashley had become one of Sophie's most dedicated converts, using her administrative skills to implement emotional intelligence protocols throughout the company. Derek, humbled by his own participation in the program, had discovered that leading with empathy actually made him more effective, not less. But the real transformation was in the small moments. Executives now held elevator doors for cleaning staff. Senior managers asked about their assistants' well-being, not just their productivity. And throughout the building, people had begun to see each other as human beings first. Walter, now officially serving as Chief Culture Advisor, still asked Sophie the same question every morning. "How do you feel today?" And Sophie's answer had evolved from shy uncertainty to confident purpose. "Today, I feel like I can help someone else feel seen." The plaque beside Sophie's office door read, "Sometimes the smallest elevator can lift the biggest hearts." But Sophie knew the real truth was simpler. When you choose to see people's pain, you also discover their incredible capacity for growth, change, and love. As winter snow began to fall outside her office window, Sophie reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened girl who used to hide behind elevator buttons, afraid to speak up, afraid to take space, afraid to believe she mattered. That girl had learned something profound. Kindness isn't weakness. Compassion isn't inefficiency. And sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones with the clearest vision of what really matters. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell stood in the doorway, her granddaughter Emma beside her. Both were carrying small wrapped packages. "We brought you something," Emma said shyly, holding out her gift. "Grandma says you're the reason she's still here to make me cookies." Sophie unwrapped the package to find a small snow globe with a tiny elevator inside. When she shook it, instead of snow, little golden hearts fell around the miniature car. "It's to remind you," Mrs. Hartwell said softly, that every time you choose to lift someone up, you create a little more love in the world. As Sophie watched the golden hearts swirl in the globe, she realized that her story was far from over. Every day brought new opportunities to see, to care, to lift. Every elevator ride was a chance to choose compassion over convenience, humanity over hierarchy. The shy elevator girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew that the most powerful button she could ever press was the one that opened her heart to others. And in doing so, she had lifted not just herself, but an entire building full of people who had forgotten how beautiful life could be when we choose to care for each other. In a world that often rewards rushing past each other, choose to be someone who stops to see. Choose to be someone who lifts others up. And if you believe that kindness is the strongest force in the universe, share this message with someone who needs to remember they matter. Hit that like button to spread Sophie's message, subscribe for more stories that restore faith in human goodness. And let me know in the comments who in your life deserves to be seen and celebrated today.